Inside Out. How are y'all doing tonight? Hey, it's great to be here with you guys. My name is Jeremy Edelen, and I'm one of the small group leaders here at Inside Out for the junior guys. Yes. I'm pumped to be up here tonight, continuing the series that we're in called Different. We're in part 2. And last week, Jackson did a phenomenal job kicking off the series, and he talked about his bleached hair, if you guys remember that. I actually went looking for an old picture of when my grandma bleached my hair when I was a kid, and I didn't know it was going to happen, and I was crying for like a day because of it. But I didn't have the picture, so I can't share that with you guys. But Jackson ended his message, and he had this statement right here that he ended his message with, and it was, start with the end in mind. Start with the end in mind, meaning when you think about where you want to go in life and what you want to accomplish in life, you first have to define it, work backwards, and start with the end in mind, and it helps you figure out what you should do right now in order to get to where you want to go. And Jackson did a great job, and I want to continue looking at this statement, but we're going to look at one specific piece of it. And the piece of this statement that we're going to unpack tonight is this right here. It's the mind. It's the mind. It's your mind. It's my mind. It's our minds, because Jackson talked about what it looked like to live differently, to live a different life. But in order to live differently, we first have to think different. We have to think different. We have to change our paradigm or our perception about life. And as I was thinking about this, I just Googled like people who think different, and people who do dumb things came up, and I just thought it was funny. And so, some of the people who think different are these guys right here with this ladder. I don't know if y'all have ever been tempted to do that, but if you ever need to paint over a stairwell, now you know how to do it. So go ahead and try that out. Another one that I saw was this one right here. I don't know if you guys, what's sad about this is like I've thought about doing this before. Like I've gone to look at the stairway, helping somebody move, and I'm like, we could probably just like let it off the edge, and I've thought about doing that, and I can't see this picture without seeing it just like fall on these guys. So I like this one. My favorite one was this one right here, though. It took me a second to think about how differently they're thinking, but I don't know if you guys can see, but the cable is in the water. Like those guys really want like the hot dogs or whatever they're cooking because the cable is in the water. But those are a couple examples of people who think differently about life, maybe in a not so positive way, in an unproductive way. But there's also examples of people who think differently about life in a way that actually changes their life and changes the world. Raise your hand if you know who this guy is right here. I hear somebody say my cousin. Yeah, who is this? Yell it out if you know it. Yeah, Steve Jobs, right? So Steve Jobs founded Apple, and he passed away just a couple years ago. But when you think about a guy who thinks differently about life and who lived a different life, this guy is like at the top of the list. Because in like the 1990s, everybody was walking around with a CD player, and he looked at it, and it was clunky, and there was this collection of CDs, and he looked at it, and he said, you know what? What if we could put 20,000 songs in your pocket? And that birthed the iPod. That's where the iPod came from. Not only this, but raise your hand if you have a smartphone. It's probably like 99.9% of people, like nobody raised their hand. Like, do you guys not have smartphones? Steve Jobs was one of the first ones to kind of envision what the smartphone could be. In fact, he's kind of the guy who came up with the whole idea of an app. And now apps kind of drive our life. Steve Jobs is a crazy, crazy thinker. And it's changed his life. It's changed so many other people's lives as well. Not only Steve Jobs, but another great one is this guy right here, MLK Jr., Martin Luther King Jr. This guy completely thought different about how to approach the civil rights movement, and as a result, it was a nonviolent approach, and it completely changed culture back then and culture today as well. And then there's my last example of people that I think differently about life is actually a personal one to me, and it's in this picture right here. This is a picture of me and my family. This is my tall, hot wife. This is Jamie, my brother. It's my mom. And this is my dad in the middle. And if you can tell, we're all like the same size. We all stopped at like 5 foot. And it's my dad and my mom's fault because my mom's like 4'10". But it has nothing to do with anything. But anyways, my dad, I asked him if I could share this. It's part of his story, and it's a personal one to me. But when I was in high school going into college, my dad struggled with alcohol. and it had a pretty significant impact on my family. He was in and out of rehab quite a bit. I remember picking him up on the side of a road because he couldn't drive at certain points. My first year of marriage, he wasn't very present because he told me that him and my mom were splitting and he was taking off. He was going to go live his life, and that's kind of what happened my first year of marriage. And then my dad came back and he started to get involved in other programs, and one of those programs was Alcoholics Anonymous. And Alcoholics Anonymous is a 12-step program, and the first step is this right here. It's admit powerlessness over alcohol. And my dad started to kind of change the way he thought about alcohol by admitting powerlessness over it. And I'm super proud of him to say that, he's sober today, that he's a part of my life, that him and my mom are together, and it's a super cool ending to that story and how that story is continuing to unfold. But I'm personally so grateful that my dad took the liberty to think differently about this issue in his life, and as a result, it changed his life, it changed my life, and it changed my family's life forever. Those are some examples of people who think differently, and the thing that kind of brings them all together for me, whether it's Steve Jobs or MLK or it's my dad, is that they all recognize that this is true, that our outlook influences our outcome. Our outlook influences our outcome. In other words, the way we think about life, our perception about life, our paradigms that we hold will influence the life that we experience. That we can't live differently without first choosing to think differently instead. Here's why this is important. Last week, Jackson Plymire was up here, and he talked about this whole idea of living a normal life. A normal life. And a normal life, by definition, we're like, okay, that sounds great, but then you begin to unpack what normal looks like. And you discover that normal includes addiction, normal includes divorce. The majority of marriages end in divorce. Normal includes, insecurity and shame. Normal includes all of those kind of things that eat away at us. That's normal. And Jackson unpacked the whole idea that we don't want a normal life, that we want something better than that. We want a different life. And that's what we're talking about in this series. But today, not only do I want to talk about living a different life, but I also want to talk about what it looks like to live a life that makes a difference. And go to the next slide. Different life, and live a life that makes a difference. Just like MLK, just like Steve Jobs, just like my dad has done in my life and in my family's life as well. But it requires us to first think different. Think different. It's hard. It takes intentionality. It's difficult, but it's worth it. Are there any Vista Ridge Rangers in here? Yeah. So I went to Vista Ridge as well. And I did wrestling. They wouldn't let me on the basketball team. I don't know why. But I did wrestling. And my senior year of high school, every year we would kind of adopt like a motto that we wanted to live by. And so my senior year of high school, we knew we wanted to have a better season than the last one. And so we started asking, what do we want to do? We knew we needed to do things different. We needed to have a different season. We had to work harder. We had to work better. And we adopted this definition of insanity by Einstein. Does anybody know Einstein's definition of insanity? Yeah, Farbs. There you go. Yeah, Farbs. It's this right here. It's doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So we kind of adopted this my senior year of high school, and we said, hey, we want to have a better season, so we want to do things differently this year. We want to work harder. We want to work better, and hopefully in return we can expect different results. We can have a better season. And the reason I share that with you guys is because I think a lot of us in here kind of approach life a little bit insanely, myself included. I think sometimes we look at life and we look at this outcome that we're experiencing and how we want it to change, but we don't really do anything or think anything different about it, so we never experience a different outcome because we're not first choosing to think differently about it. So that's what we're going to unpack today, and I want to give you guys one facet of what it means to think differently in your life. And this idea comes from a guy in the Old Testament. And this guy, you've probably never heard of him before. Many of us haven't heard of him before. I hadn't heard of him before I started reading into it. And it's a guy that we've never talked about before at Inside Out, but he's got a pretty amazing story. I just met a guy who named his kid after this dude. So he's got a pretty amazing story, and his name is Benaiah. Benaiah. And Benaiah lived around 3,000 years ago, and his story is actually captured in the Old Testament. So if you think about the Bible, if you're new to the Bible or you're new to Christianity, the Bible is broken up into two different sections. It's broken up into the New Testament and broken up into the Old Testament. And the New Testament is basically like the teachings of Jesus and the early church, and then the Old Testament is kind of everything in creation that happened before that as it relates to this country called the nation of Israel, who are considered God's people. And there's a specific point in this time when King David was ruling. And raise your hand if you recognize David and Goliath, like if that rings a bell for you, David and Goliath. Yeah, so that all comes from the Old Testament, that whole story. It's like a cultural reference now. And David and Goliath, the time that David was alive was the time that Benaiah was alive as well. And the Old Testament describes what Benaiah was like. Here's what it says. It says, Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, because I honestly tried to practice how to say it, and so we're just going to butcher it instead. But a valiant fighter from Kabzeel performed great exploits. So he was super successful. He was super accomplished. He struck down Moab's two mightiest warriors. It was an opposing nation. He got two of their best guys down. He also went into a pit on a snowy day and killed a lion. So as you can tell, this guy is like if J.J. Watt and a Marine had a baby. Like this is that kind of guy. Like he's a beast of a dude. He's a monster. And it continues to unpack what he was like. Here's what it says. It says, and he struck down a huge Egyptian. Although the Egyptian had a spear in his hand, Benaiah went against him with a club. So he's an underdog, but look what happens. It goes on. And it says, he snatched the spear from the Egyptian's hand and killed him with his own spear. Such were the exploits of Benaiah, son of Jehoiada. And that's Benaiah. And then you see what happens as a result of it. It says, and then David put him in charge of his bodyguard. So King David, the David and Goliath guy, he has like a secret service essentially. And it's a secret service that their job is to protect him, kind of like the president. And it's his bodyguard. And David sees Benaiah one day and hears his story, hears his accomplishments, and it catches his eye so much that he asks Benaiah to be the leader of his bodyguard that protects him and keeps his life safe. And this is Benaiah's story, and he has an amazing story. But what's interesting is when you just read over these verses, when you read over Benaiah's story, you miss something that's kind of defined him and kind of stuck out to a lot of people. And it's one specific accomplishment that when you read it fast, you miss it. We just read it a second ago, but it has a lot of significance in our life. And here's what that is. We go back a couple verses. It says, he, Benaiah, also went down into a pit on a snowy day and killed a lion. Went down into a pit on a snowy day and killed a lion. It's easy to just read this one sentence and be like, oh, what a big deal. But then when you begin to imagine what this is like, it comes to life a little bit. Picture Benaiah walking on a snow path one day, and he's walking and the snow's crunching beneath his feet. He can see his breath in the air. It's fog in the air. And then he hears something on the side, and his eyes look over to the corner, and what he sees looking back at him is this right here. A 500-pound kitty, a 500-pound cat. But this isn't just a 500-pound beast. When you look at the statistics of what a lion can do, it's crazy. A lion can run up to 50 miles per hour. A lion can stand 11 feet tall. Their bite force is 1,000 pounds per cubic inch, per square inch. It's amazing. This is a beast of a creature. And Benaiah's walking one day and he sees the lion over here, and they kind of lock eyes. And then Benaiah does something completely counterintuitive that you would never expect him to do. Most people, most of us, myself included, we would take off running. But Benaiah doesn't do that. He faces the lion. He actually chases the lion. And then the lion falls into a pit. And then Benaiah is kind of standing above the pit. And at this point, any sane person would just go, I'm safe now. I'm going to walk away. And Benaiah doesn't do that. He jumps into the pit with the lion. And I kind of picture this scene where they start to kind of circle each other, and they're staring each other in the face, and they're circling. And then a fight happens. And I'm sure Benaiah came out with some pretty big scratches on him. But at the end of the fight, he killed the lion. It's a crazy story when you begin to think about it. And you might be thinking, okay, Jeremy, why are you telling us about this story? And the reason is because I'm assuming nobody in here has ever crossed paths with a lion before in their life. If you have and you're living and you can tell the story, I want to hear it. That sounds awesome. But I'm assuming that's not the case. But metaphorically, what I know to be true is that we all have some lions in our life that we tend to cross paths with. We have some lions. it could be fear. We might cross paths with fear at one point in our life. Maybe something happens in our past and it makes us scared for what could happen in the future. It could be fear, or it could be anxiety. Maybe you crave control and you get in a situation when you're out of control and it just causes you to be anxious. And this lion keeps you from living a different life. Maybe for you, it's an obstacle. Maybe you keep running into an obstacle that pops up over and over and over and over again, and it keeps you from living the life you want to live. You can't seem to get past it. Maybe for you, it's insecurity. Maybe you just feel like you're not good enough to some extent, like you can't be yourself around people because you're insecure, and it keeps you from living a different life. Maybe for you, your lion is shame. Maybe you just carry a shame around with you wherever you go, and you allow it to keep you from living a different life. Maybe for you, it's a habit that pops up over and over and over again, and you can't seem to break it, and it's keeping you from experiencing life and living life like I know you ultimately want to do. Or lastly, maybe for you and a lion is the word no. Maybe it's a coach, a teacher, a college, a significant other, and you heard the word no, and it kept you from living a different life that you wanted to live. You see, what Benaiah's story shows us is that when we come across lions in our life, and whatever that lion might be for your particular story, when we face lions in our life, what Benaiah shows us is that when we change our outlook and we change our perspective, that we no longer have to run away, that we can actually face them, that we can stand up to them, we can jump into the pit with them, and we can stare them dead in the eyes. That's how we can face our lions. And he shows us this principle that we talked about just a second ago, that outlook influences outcome. Your outlook, when it comes to the lions that you have in your life, the way you perceive them is going to influence what happens as a result of those things in your life as you try to live a different life. To which we go, okay, well, why was Benaiah able to do this? What enabled him to do this? And I think what allowed him to do this, when I look at his life, is that he had a different outlook on God. He had a much different outlook on God than many of us have. Benaiah had a very large perspective of who God is. So I think many of us in here, we tend to put God in some sort of box or some sort of crate. And we take all of our life experiences, what we perceive to be good or bad, the things that we think about others, the things that we believe or don't believe, and we put it all in this box with God, and we say, here's God in this box. Sometimes we leave him over here on the weekends so we don't have to think about him. And then on Sunday, we come back, we bring him back out again, and we say, here's God, and here he is in this box. But you see, Benaiah didn't put God in a box. He had a much bigger perception and perspective of who God was in his life. And it changed his outlook. A couple of fun facts to kind of challenge us in our perception of God. I don't know if you guys know this, but we're currently sitting on Earth, one planet in one solar system, out of 200 billion solar systems in the Milky Way galaxy. The Milky Way galaxy is one out of 100 billion galaxies in the universe that we know of. When you think about that, it makes us feel a little bit small. Not only this, but have you ever thought about time? How we live within the dimension of time, that time is kind of in our box and we can't really comprehend anything outside of that? That there's a beginning and an end to everything. And when we try to think about God, of not having a beginning or an end and being outside of time, our brains just kind of fall apart. Like we can't even comprehend how crazy and how big that is. That's God. That's Benaiah's view of God. And then lastly, one of the things I find most interesting is, I don't know if you know this, but when we look up into the night sky, or you look out into the world, we only can see 4% of what is there. Because when you look up into space and you see matter and you see planets and you see stars, you're seeing the 4%. There's 96% of this stuff called dark energy and dark matter that we can't see and we can't explain. And yet we still tend to put God in a box and say, here's how big God is. And Benaiah's story is even crazier because he didn't know all of those stats, but he still saw God as this massive, massive being. And as a result of seeing God the way that he's meant to be seen, infinite and big and great, Benaiah was able to face any lion that came across his path because it shrunk when he saw it. There's an author that says it best like this, and then we're getting close to breaking into small groups, but he says this. He says, the most portentous fact, or the most significant fact, the most important fact about any man is not what he at a given time may say or do, but what he in his deep heart conceives God to be like. The most important thing about each and every person in this room is not what we say, not what we do, not where we come from. The most defining characteristic of who we are is what we think about God when we look up in the night sky and how big we might think that he is. And the reason that's true is because when we look up and we begin to see God for who he really is, outside of our box, outside of our frame of thinking, it completely changes our outlook. It completely changes our perspective on life, and we begin to see our lions get a little bit smaller, and our lions start to look like this guy. He's cute. He's like trying to growl and scare us. But I think we would just laugh at that. And that's kind of Benaiah's point. That's kind of how Benaiah saw the lion that he came across. Because his view of God was so big, this is all he saw. And so, to end our time, I just want to ask you a couple questions. And the first one is this. Would you be willing to change your outlook? Would you be willing to expand your frame of thinking and change your outlook? And more importantly, would you be willing to change your outlook on God? I mean, would you be willing to expand your perception of who you believe that God is, and to recognize that not only is he a big, big God, mightier, more infinite than anything we can possibly fathom, but he is also a God who loves you, demonstrated that through Jesus, and he is for you. And that he wants you to open up your hands to him, and he wants to tell a story in your life, a new chapter in your life where you're able to face lions in your life, and he wants to do something so crazy and unimaginable in your life and in your story. But he just wants you to trust him with it. And he just wants you to look up and recognize how big he is and watch how the lions shrink in your life. Would you be willing to quit making God in your image and allow him to continue molding you and shaping you in his image? Would you be willing to change your outlook on God? And as a result, I think your outcome will change. And not only will you think different, but you will live a different life. Let me pray for our time tonight. God, we can't even begin to comprehend how big you are, Father. But we are so thankful for the fact that we can talk to you, that you've made a way for us to have this relationship with you through Jesus, where we can have a personal connection with you, that we can look up and call you Father, Dad. That's amazing. God, help us understand more about you so that when we look at the things in our life, that they get smaller. And allow us to face the things in our life with your strength and your love and knowing that you are for us. God, unpack this more in our minds as we go to small group. And we pray all this in your name. Amen.